Hello, everybody. Today I am broadcasting from planet Tatooine, and we are going to be looking at this race that we call the human race on planet Earth. And we will do so by studying film and series that this species itself has produced. And we will look at it through the spiral dynamic lens, which is a theory of developmental evolution that one of their very brilliant scientists developed. So let's take a look at various films and series through the stages and see uh, what we can surmise from these. So we'll start at stage beige, which is what you could say the most basic stage that all humans start at, whether on an individual level or on a historic time scale. I think a good film that gives us an indication of this is a film called Alpha. It was released in 2018. It's a story about a young man who has to go out on his own. Actually, he gets separated from his tribe, and he befriends a wolf that becomes his companion, and together they have to make it through the wilderness and survive various different difficulties, like in this scene where he falls below the ice and the wolf is trying to help him. And so it's one event after the other where he's just trying to live. And the film is beautiful and also agonizing because you keep wondering if this person is going to make it, if he's just going to survive. Some words of wisdom that this boy's father gave him back in the tribe was that life is for the strong. It is earned, not given. And that is something that he learned on his journey of having to find food for himself, having to find shelter, having to find warmth, and then journeying back to his tribe as a man. And next up is Paul, who will continue talking about beige.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the movie I'm going to talk about is Jeremiah Johnson, um, and it in the opening scene of the movie we hear tranquil, haunting notes of a single Native American flute, and see the peaceful scene of a pole barge being slowly navigated toward a small but busy frontier settlement, sitting on the shore of a wide river. Off the boat jumps a young man wearing an old and much worn military uniform and with a satchel bag slung over his shoulder. Um, the storyline of the movie is opened with these words from a narrator. His name was Jeremiah Johnson. They say he wanted to be a mountain man. The story goes that he was a man of proper wit and adventurous spirit, suited to the mountains. Nobody knows whereabouts he come from and don't seem to matter much. He was a young man, and ghosty stories about the tall hills didn't scare him none. He was looking for a Hawk and gun, 50 caliber or better. He settled for a 30, but damn, it was a genuine Hawken. You couldn't go no better. Bought him a good horse and traps, another truck that went with being a mountain man, and said goodbye to whatever life was down there below. Jeremiah Johnson is actually one of my favorite movies. Um, and it's a story of a man who chose to leave the civilization behind and set out into the mountains to live a life of pure and raw survival. A life that put the protagonist deeply into the middle of the natural world with sparse and limited human interactions. It is indeed the story of a man living a life that ultimately demanded that he adopt a very beige centered view of the world. As the story unfolds on the screen, I believe we can see put on full display most of the major characteristics of beige developmental stage. Throughout the movie, but most especially at the beginning, you see Jeremiah struggling to learn many new and very basic life skills, finding food, keeping warm, keeping at bay the constant press of nature against his survival. Through this period, he is slowly stripped of the vestiges of his former, more civilized life. He is reduced to a more basic level of being. Through this reducing process, he does, step by step, establish within himself a greater oneness with the natural world around him, harsh though it may be. Um, he does learn to hunt, forage for food, cook his food, clothe himself from the materials nature could provide, hunting elk and deer with his hawk and rifle. He prepares the meat um, they, that they provide and little by little clothe himself with their skins. At first, he does this mostly by himself, slowly, with much trial and error, gradually learning the basic survival skills that allow him to ward off starvation and death. As the storyline progresses, he begins to encounter other kindred spirits along the way who teach him even more deeply the ways of survival in the mountains. Bear Claw, his grizzled old mentor, Caleb, the orphan boy who Jeremiah was grudgingly coerced out of sheer survival necessity to adopt. Dalgue, his temperamental opposite, yet still very good friend. And finally, Swan, his accidental bride and daughter of the chief of the Flathead tribe. Later, Swan, Caleb, and Jeremiah formed into a strong and capable family, working together to build a sturdy. Go back. You want to go back one?
I went
Yeah.
back.
Okay. Yeah. I'll tell you when to switch to the third slide. I'm just about done here.
Right.
Working together to build a sturdy and comfortable cabin, their relationship grows from one of survival necessity to one of love and deep respect for each other. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Yeah. Hunt, cook, and eat, move on. Hunt, cook, and eat, move on. This really is a theme that was repeatedly depicted throughout the movie. Although the effort and focus that Jeremiah needs to devote to those basic survival skills does lessen over time, they really never do go away. Even when he, Swan, and Caleb eventually establish their more permanent home base, the ever recurring need to hunt, cook, and eat and clothe themselves always remains. Towards the middle of the movie, the movie takes a tragic turn with the murder of Swan and Caleb by a band of warriors from the Crow tribe. Jeremiah, in return, seeks his revenge upon them and kills all but one of the group of warriors. Out of revenge for killing of those Crow warriors, more warriors are dispatched by the chief of the Crow tribe to kill Jeremiah. We then see scene after scene of Jeremiah fighting for his life against one Crow warrior after another, and this unending stream of vengeful antagonists sent specifically to take his life work to slowly traumatize him psychologically and really utterly exhaust him emotionally. At nearly the end of the movie, there's a scene that occurs between Jeremiah and his old mentor and friend Bearclaw. Any evidence of their former bonds of friendship are nearly gone. Jeremiah was unusually taciturn, and there was a terse exchange of words, and then Bearclaw departs. The Jeremiah shown in this scene was a man who neither sought or wanted much human communication or interaction. And then finally, at the very, very end of the movie, there's a scene where the chief of the Crow tribe seeks out Jeremiah to make peace with him. The movie then comes to at the very end, the narrator, in a very slow song verse, declares, and some folks say he's still up there. Um, I think Jeremiah Johnson is a touching story with interesting characters, spectacularly beautiful cinematography, and equal portions of human tenderness and triumph, as well as violence and tragedy. I highly recommend this movie, and I think it's a good example of somebody who although at some point in their life transitioned beyond beige, but out of whatever set of reasons decided to return to that kind of a lifestyle. Thank you.
Now, you'll notice that on the bottom right corner, there's a little red square that will indicate when there's a change of speaker. So in theory, the next person up would be Tad, but unfortunately he had a work emergency, so he's not able to make it.
Do
He
you
did
want me to
include,
talk about it a little bit?
do you know this series, Barbara?
A bit.
Okay, there's some quotes included, so I don't know if you want to read the quotes or just talk about it. Go ahead. Because I haven't seen it.
So Jeremiah Johnson is a historical story, right? From a civilization that was blue going into orange at the time. And
Yeah.
my memory is he's supposed to have been a soldier that couldn't stand it anymore, right?
Right.
But
It's set in the 1830s.
yeah, so this is now the modern version, right, of what happens when folks get into situations of pure survival. And you notice what's really interesting in this one is it's very much like Jeremiah Johnson in that the survival things are cold, right? And being able to feed yourself and keep yourself warm in the cold weather, which probably takes us back to, early humans in the ice ages, right?
These are people that live in Alaska.
These are people nowadays that live in Alaska, correct?
Mhm.
And have some of the same situations. And interestingly enough, if you compare this to the Aleuts, for example, they don't have these problems. And I think part of the reason they don't have these problems of survival is because they're more attuned to their environment, right? So these are folks who moved up there and decided they're going to see whether they can survive below zero, right? So if you want to move on to the next one, I'm not sure how many he's got.
There's this one and one more.
Yeah, let me see what the next one is. Yeah. So notice these folks aren't leaving modern day behind, right? Even more so than Jeremiah Johnson. They're out there with technology, right? They're, if you saw the one before, they had a backhoe, I believe, in that. So it's a really weird, yeah. See, so a lot of this is about building modern technological things to help them stay alive. So it's very different than Jeremiah Johnson in that sense, right? Because they're bringing their technology with them, not just a rifle and some traps, but in the summer they're bringing in all sorts of modern technology. A lot
I
of
think
it
these are some
doesn't
really
work.
good quotes. I think these are good quotes, Barbara. One person says, physically, it's a demanding way to live, but psychologically, I actually find it easier than living in modern society. And then in the other one, the person says, the most important thing in my life is independence and freedom. So again, this reflects their values.
But you notice those aren't beige values. Those are both, particularly the one on the right is red values.
That's true.
Yeah. And so it's hard to do beige stuff because nobody in these was in beige when they started out to go into these situations, right? So Jeremiah Johnson, the folks up in Alaska, very few of them in this series anyway are natives to Alaska, or if they were city kids from Anchorage, for example, who decided to go out into the wilderness. So it always felt to me like it had a rather red me against the world feel to it, right? Which is why I wouldn't have chosen it for beige. But On the other hand, if you go through the series, they've got some footage that is clearly very beige as people are running out of food in the winter, running out of heating. Jeremiah Johnson had trees forever, given that there were so few people there. Not so up in Alaska. They've run out of fuel. They've run out of food. It's been hunted out. So they end up in very beige situations. But of course, there's a camera crew and a cell phone there to rescue them, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of a weird, unlike Jeremiah Johnson, which was you survive on your own or you're done for, right?
Right.
And the one I had proposed, there's one called Naked and Afraid, and so they throw them out literally naked with minimal supplies and not cold very much. Mostly it's been in nasty jungles. But you look at it and there's a film crew there all the time. So, and I couldn't find the sessions, or I would have actually done one where, so somebody gets an infection or something, the film crew just calls in the helicopter and they take them out, right? So these are weird sorts of beige situations where you end up in a beige situation, but there's always the cell phone right there to call for help. So
yeah, it's not true beige, but it's a beige environment.
it's an effort to get back to red and beige, I would think. Not very much purple in it, right? Because you don't see a lot of the neighbors getting together. And you notice Jeremiah Johnson tried purple with his little family and ended up having them murdered by another purple tribe, typically purple, right?
Yeah, well, the Jeremiah Johnson, and this is depicted in a number of the scenes. He does interact with some of the native tribes, but he does not choose to actually join the tribe like you would have seen in the movie Dances with Wolves.
Right, exactly.
But what he does end up with, again, and this is very beige, is he ends up with a very small band of people that he bonds himself to. It's not like Beige in its original form was a bunch of individuals out there bumping into each other. They did form very small, tight, familial bands.
Yes, they
Hey,
did.
why don't we continue this discussion after the presentation?
Good idea.
It's interesting because it is a collaborative presentation. It's easy to default to just the normal conversations that we have after presentation because, that's what it lends itself to. And I do have to mention that because I didn't get quite as many contributions as I expected or I hoped for, because I wanted this to be a fully collaborative presentation where I actually only spoke a small amount. I had to fill in the blanks myself. So I'm actually going to be talking about more films and series than maybe other folks. So that's why you're going to be hearing from me a little bit, although I'll try to keep it short. So I'm going to talk a little bit about purple now. And there's a documentary called Aluna, which if you haven't seen it, you can find it for free. You can watch it for free on YouTube. And I'm going to read a couple short texts. So this documentary is about a people who live in Colombia. They're the Koji people, and they refer to themselves as elder brothers. And they refer to the developed world as younger brothers. So the elder brothers believe that they're the guardians of life on earth. They see the world as a single living being, which they have to look after and care for. Their whole way of life is dedicated to nurturing the flora and fauna of the world. They are, in short, an ecological community whose morality is wholly concerned with the health of the planet. Now, the elder brothers have seen the changes start, which mark the end of life. The world is beginning to die. They know we are killing it. That is why the elder brothers have spoken. They wish to warn us and to teach us. Now, this tribe speaking directly. They say, the Mama says that it is very difficult for younger brother to hear and listen, and even harder to give up all that. But younger brother must be taught to listen to the history of the Mama, the law of the Mama, the beliefs of the Mama, in that if there is a scientist like the Mama who knows the earth, I do not know what sort, but who knows about the earth, Let him study the earth to see, is it declining or not? Does the world grow weak? Why is it weak? Because they take out much of its lifeblood, minerals, and the mama is frightened. It makes him fearful. They say that younger brother is studying more, but he is studying to destroy the world. So the mama is somewhat frightened, and that is why the mama says they must learn our history. They must listen to our history. So again, a very interesting people. They in the second documentary, because there's actually 2 documentaries made about them. In the second one, a few individuals from this tribe traveled to the United Kingdom, and it was amazing how unfazed they were by modernity and technology. They were unfazed by it, and they went to a planetarium. And in that planetarium, all the equipment and everything that could be used to witness the stars was uninteresting to them. But when they looked at photographs of the stars, they were able to identify all of them. They knew exactly what the stars and were. So their understanding of the planet Earth and of the star system is much deeper than our own. And if you can see on the top where I say documentary Aluna, I have this in purple, but behind it I have green and yellow, because I feel that their wisdom is something that we need to reintegrate in green and in yellow in second tier. So I didn't have anything, nobody contributed anything for red. So at first I wasn't sure what to talk about. And then I decided to talk about Rome, which is an excellent series, very gruesome. The way they reconstructed Rome is quite impressive. But the characters there are mostly self-serving. They're seeking power or they're seeking pleasure. And it was a pretty luxurious and tough world to live in. I mean, it was luxurious if you were in the elite class, and if you were just a normal or a poor person, I think life was very difficult, or even a slave, because the Romans at that time became powerful through the slave trade. And this is just the only scene I'm going to show, the second scene I'm going to show from this series. This conversation between 2 of the main characters. We have Titus and Lucius, and Titus says, "Me, I have simple tastes. I like to kill my enemy, take their gold, and enjoy their women." And then Lucius says, "When was the last time you had a woman that wasn't crying or wanting payment?" So it's this idea of red, that you take what you need and you're not very concerned about the feelings of others. This whole idea of boundaries that we have nowadays, I think, was practically non-existent, unless again you were in the elite class. And then I'm going to talk about another series in the context of red and blue, a show called The Last Kingdom. 2 of the main characters whose dynamic I find fascinating are Uhtred of Bebbanburg, who is the person that you see on the left, and King Alfred on the right. Uhtred was born as a Saxon. He was born the son of a noble Saxon nobleman, but he was taken when he was a child by a group of Danes, and he was raised as a Dane. So he basically becomes like a Viking, and those become his values. And when he's sort of semi-reintegrated back into English society, he doesn't really know if he's Saxon or Dane. He's both, but he definitely values his sense of freedom. And for me, has a positive sense of red. I feel like I've learned a lot from him, because his sense of honor, I mean, he's a warrior. He fights for what he believes in, but he has a sense, like a healthy sense of honor. This is a quote from him where he says, "Courage is finding the will to overcome your fear, nothing more." Whereas King Alfred, who's a real historical figure, says, "Fear can be expelled with knowledge." And Alfred to me, represents blue. He's trying to, he has a vision for bringing together the various kingdoms to build a larger kingdom of what will be England. And you can see here that he has a library full of scrolls. So he's trying to document the history of his kingdom. And that's something sort of new at that time for a king to be literate and be interested in knowledge. And Uhtred, sort of at times helps King Alfred, but at the same time, Uhtred is unwilling to become a complete servant or be tied to anybody. And in this quote, I think it summarizes it pretty well. He said, "I had no wish to join Alfred and learn to read and bruise my knees with praying." So he didn't want to become a Christian. And he was happy with himself, and he was really brave and just was always willing to, again, to be true to himself. So up next is Josh to talk about The Walking Dead. Josh, are you there?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the character Negan from The Walking Dead. It is a zombie television show that's been on for, I think, about 10 years. It was very popular before, it became a little less popular, but you don't have to know the show to get what's going on here. So I think we're doing 3 slides, right? 3 in a row?
That's
Yeah.
right.
So this character Negan, so we're living in a zombie apocalypse world, right? And there's different communities, and then there's the good guys and the bad guys and stuff like that. There's this guy who's a really bad guy. You can tell because he's got a leather jacket on, and he basically kills people, and that's his bat with which he murders people. So I don't need to get into the specific details, but he does do some terrible, terrible things. He is basing it all off of power, off of basically giving into his impulses, finding his most egocentric self, and yes, using actual physical violence on others. But he doesn't just do it purely to be a dick. He leads a group of folks and they revere his power. They're living in a very difficult world, and it's kind of important to them to have this leadership figure. So he also believes, and in some ways it's true, he does provide this important role for others. There are, of course, other ways to be a leader in this world, which is what kind of the good guy tribe dabbles in, which I'm not going to get into. But basically, he, I feel like, embodies red. He even literally has a red scarf. So I don't think that the makers of this new Spiral Dynamics, but a lot of this stuff is intuitive anyway. And so that was basically a season or 2 worth of dealing with his redness and how other people are going to deal with it and trying not to descend into that redness. But then what happens is they capture him and they put him in a little jail cell. So I think we can move on to the next slide of this character Negan. And so that's him. You can see it's in bars. There's bars. So it's this little jail cell. And he spends a lot of time reading and just sort of sitting in the cell, and mostly in the beginning being his same red self. He's just the beast in the cage and he's trying to be manipulative. But over time, he starts talking to people and starts to develop a kind of structure. So he gets more information in his head. He starts realizing the ethical components. And the really interesting thing is that the last episode in the season that just was on last week had his prehistory, so his story before, where he basically was kind of going back and forth. So he had all these elements already. So in a sense, this red of his was a regression because of the life conditions. So he had the blue in him already, which is a little different, I would say, than your average individual who might have a center of gravity in red. And this concept of prison rep formation, which of course is kind of controversial. Is that really true? You lock somebody in a cage to become better? Not necessarily, but it's clear that there are a fair amount of folks who go to prison, they're murderers, and they do find God, whether they're pretending it or not. It's clear some of them do. They develop some kind of structure, or at least a blue structure of, you do bad things, we're going to put you in here again. It's like, all right, I'm going to start following this. So it seems as if over a period of, I don't know if it's many years, this Negan character develops a bit of this moral ethic of, okay, what I was doing was wrong. This is what's right in this society. And he no longer is living in that red life conditions. He is being fed, he is being sheltered. So he starts developing himself a little bit. And then what happens is they actually let him go. So go to the next slide, if you could, Veronica, please.
It's there.
So this is a weird context to explain here. So he's not making out with her. But so my argument, and this is very, very debatable, of course, as is all of this. So they let him go temporarily because there's a new bad guy who is a woman, a bad person, bad entities that are out there, and they're really crappy because his tribe and stuff had already been destroyed. And so they utilize his potentially red powers, but at this point added on that blue structure of, okay, these folks are, this bald woman is doing some really crappy stuff with her little group. These other folks are trying to do something. So he incorporates that blue into what I would argue is a kind of orange. So he's realizing it's going to benefit his status to kill the other bad guys, to be having an elevated position with the quote good guys. And so my argument is, at this point, because he's incorporated those blue aspects, he is now coming from an orange. He's doing a striving. He's trying to accomplish something, which he does. He ends up killing her, and then he starts becoming, controversially, a more full-fledged member of the community, in which he actually initially started to murder people. So it's very opposite to the concept of that cancel culture. Like, you do something, you say something bad once, and you're always that person. Now, it's arguable if you murder people once, yeah, that's a little worse. But in our culture today, it's like, well, he was 18 and then he said that terrible word. It's like, yeah, he's 47 now. He's not even the same person. He's in a different stage. So even with Negan, that happened. And it's a very interesting idea of, do you let people progress? Do you push them back? And there are some members in the tribe who have not accepted the fact that he's evolved. And oddly, their lack of acceptance is potentially pushing him back into a red, where he just needs to defend himself, and he's flirting with egotism and impulsivity again, because he's like, if I'm not even accepted for making my evolution, then why should I be trying anymore? So that's basically my spiel on Negan. The whole series of The Walking Dead, to me, is folks who were once in orange and green go into zombie apocalypse, which is beige, and then they're building up. You see purple tribes, you see a lot of red, and then you see them all struggling with, aren't we supposed to be more than red? And even the good guys going back and forth. So if you look at that show, even if it's boring to you, you look at it through the lens of spiral dynamics, it's really fascinating.
Okay, that was very interesting. Thank you, Josh.
Sure.
So to mention briefly a film that I think could be considered orange is The Name of the Rose, which I assume probably a lot of you have seen because it's a well-known film. And it was also made into a series more recently. And of course, it originally was a book. But it tells the story of this character called William of Baskerville, who was a Franciscan monk, who comes to a Benedictine abbey to investigate a murder. But the atmosphere in this abbey is very oppressive. It's kind of like a toxic, a dark sort of blue, almost purple, in the sense that even though they have a library and they're supposed to be preservers of knowledge, it's like there's this fear of this hidden evil, this unnamed evil that is what's causing these deaths. It starts out with one murder and then it continues on to other murders. And so the feeling that you get is of this dark oppressiveness. And William is just this very rational person, and he's not fearful. He just wants to get to the bottom of things. So he's going to do everything that he can to find clues to understand what is happening. And I don't want to spoil the ending for those that haven't seen it, but it turns out that what's been causing I won't say who's the murder, but what's sort of behind all of this is this huge effort to hide a work by Aristotle, a comedy, that was considered provocative or evil because, you know, they're supposed to be serious monks. They're supposed to be devoted to God in a way that's very serious. So this comedy by Aristotle was considered threatening. And I actually I was hoping that we could talk about sort of the more toxic side of orange, because we are sort of, orange is our center of gravity in our culture right now. But we don't have too many examples, although Steve is going to talk next. And I think that his has to do with orange and green. So maybe he'll be able to shed some light on this. Steve, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. So how many slides is this, Veronica? Is it?
I believe it's 3. And
3, okay.
just tell me to flip them. They're in no particular order.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I Heart Huckabees, 2004, directed by David Owen Russell. It's a very interesting film, I would suggest, for members of this group, if anyone hasn't seen it. It's a comedy, but it's a strange comedy. It calls itself an existential comedy. And it's very much in the sort of, its focus of concern is related to some of the sort of the type of analysis that you see in the kind of spiral dynamics. And the 2 main protagonists are these 2 on the right here. Albert Makovsky, the one with the sort of longer, dark, lank hair, played by Jason Schwartzman. And he's he's very much a green. He's a young environmentalist who started this group called Open Spaces Coalition. And they're trying to stop the building of a new Huckabees store, which is meant to be a sort of giant department store, on a sort of marshland space. And in a way, the film slightly kind of pokes fun at him because he's activism. He's also reading his own poetry. There's a sort of a slight kind of limpness to him. And also there's a sort of sense that he's getting maybe very exercised about this stretch of scrubland. Maybe there are bigger issues or whatever. And his counterpart there, played by Jude Law, is the character Brad Strand. And he's a very much a sort of careerist executive at Huckabees who's infiltrated the group, the activist group, and has effectively won them over using charisma, the fact that he's more organized. He says he'll do events bringing in celebrities. I think Shania Twain keeps getting mentioned in the film. So it's a sort of very much like kind of green. It's a kind of making fun of the whole green orange tension there. And there's also a sort of sense that the Brad character can actually achieve things, but then at what cost? So even though he wants to save a tiny bit of the scrubland, the deal is that the store still gets built, basically. So it's a sort of a slightly weird victory he's offering the group there. And then the Brad character also has a living girlfriend called Dawn Campbell, who's played by Naomi Watts. Should we go to the next slide? And yeah.
Those are the only images
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have.
I don't think she's in these ones. So she's played by Naomi Watts, and she's basically the face of the brand. So she's in all of their ads. So they're sort of like the kind of classic orange power couple. You know, she's very much on the marketing side. He's very much on the executive side, and the film kind of portrays them in those kind of cliches. And then what gives it this interesting sort of spin right from the beginning is that the Albert character, the environmentalist, has a series of coincidences which have happened before the film starts. He's talking about them, that lead him to seek out these so-called existential detectives. So he engages with this couple. What are the character names here? They are Bernard and Vivian, played by Dustin Hoffman and Lily Tomlin. And they have run this very sort of weird, quirky detective agency, which is sort of looking not necessarily for you know, the answer to a whodunit, but more the kind of existential cause behind a situation. So he goes to them ostensibly seeking the existential reason for these coincidences. He can't believe the fact that he's seen this this tall African gentleman in 3 different situations can be just a coincidence. And then that's kind of then where the whole film starts to kind of play out of. And they use these very sort of eccentric or sort of bizarre semi-therapeutic techniques, like you saw in the previous slide. They got them to go in almost like a sort of sensory deprivation bag. And here the Dustin Hoffman character was holding a sheet, but he uses that to explain the interconnectivity of the universe and how everything's interrelated. And then they introduce Albert to another character called Tommy Corn, who's the Mark Wahlberg character there. And he's coming really from a kind of blue space. He's a kind of heroic firefighter who's suddenly become aware of the problem of petroleum, the environment. That ends up kind of flipping the Tommy character into a kind of nihilistic state. He's gone from blue, he has a kind of complete crisis, and he basically loses faith in everything. So there's that kind of story playing out. And they have the couple, the detective couple, have this so-called nemesis character played by Isabelle Huppert, I think. And her character name is Catherine Bourbon, and she's apparently a sort of a classic type of postmodern nihilist type philosopher. And she's the Tommy character, the firefighter, gets very interested in her writing, and that it's all empty and meaningless, and it's all just the cruel, absurd comedy of life kind of thing. And she then shows up. So she shows up as I think, and they get involved with her, and the Albert character has an affair with her as well, which further drives the Tommy character into his nihilism. And then just another complication in the plot line, the Brad character, the corporate guy, in an attempt to sort of further undermine Albert, enlists himself as a client of these sort of therapeutic detectives, but then with kind of quite unexpected consequences. So as they start working with him and his girlfriend, they really start questioning their whole meaning of their lives, basically, in their whole roles. And he starts realizing that he's lived his whole life just to please others, just to please his superiors, to get on up the corporate ladder. She starts questioning her whole dependence and reliance on her looks and her appearance and having to appear a certain way for her career. They realize they don't even really love each other or whatever. And then the whole thing culminates in a fire, which Albert had actually accidentally started when he wanted to burn Brad's jet skis for whatever reason. The whole Brad's house catches fire. And all the characters converge on the scene, and Tommy becomes the hero of the day because he's refusing to drive. The fire engine gets caught in a traffic jam, but he gets there on his bicycle and turns up and saves the Dawn character, who falls in love with him. The Brad character has a kind of breakdown as he sees all of his material wealth kind of going up in flames in front of his eyes. And the Albert character has a kind of enlightenment epiphany, whereas he sees the equivalence in some ways of all of their roles and how they're conditioned by their experience and their circumstance. So he has a kind of epiphany. And at the very end, you see the so-called nemesis woman, the Catherine, standing with the other two, and clearly they actually operate as a trio, and it's a kind of a transcendent thing. So they are themselves operating very much within a sort of yellow going on turquoise kind of thing. So there's a kind of transcendent kind of final perspective there to kind of wrap up the film. So I hope I've given a lot of spoilers there. Anyone wants to see it, but I still think it's worth seeing it anyway. That's a little image there that depicts some of the sort of more turquoisey kind of moments in the film there, where he's encouraging the Tommy character to dissolve his self, his personahood. So thank you.
Okay, that looked really interesting. I need to see that. So for green, it just dawned on me that I need to include Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It's a children's series. It ran from 1968 to 2001. Actually, it's a series that was filmed in Pittsburgh, where I used to live, and I was actually on the set of Mr. Rogers and had a friend that worked on the set. So I feel some kind of affection for this series. So Mr. Rogers says, "There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are." And for me, that's a very green expression because it's learning to really accept who we are as individuals and know that we are all different, but sort of accepting that difference. There was a scene that was filmed in 1969 between Mr. Rogers and Officer Clemons. And this was at a time where there was racial segregation, especially in the public swimming pools, where blacks and whites swam in separate pools. And so Fred Rogers decided to shoot the scene where they soaked their feet together in a small plastic pool. And then he reshot that scene in 1993 again, sort of as a reminder that even though things have gotten better, there's still problems. There's still racism and things that need to be solved. What's interesting, a sort of backstory, is that Officer Clemons was or is gay. Fred Rogers died, but I think the actor that plays Officer Clemons is still alive. Is gay, but Fred Rogers asked him not to publicize that or not to let people know because a lot of the audience that watched this show was very blue, very traditional. So they didn't want to, they didn't want to stir things up too much. Like they wanted to introduce values of equality, but they didn't want to be too provocative. So they had to sort of balance these needs. And then this is a series that I discovered just this year, which I have to admit I really like. It's called Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. I don't know how many of you have seen it. So there are several characters. Then the main character is Zoe, and I feel that the series is very green on many levels, and I'm going to talk about a few of the reasons. But one of them is that she learns to intuit, or she can tune into what people are feeling, their deepest emotions. And she does that through a song. She'll hear them singing a song that is meaningful to them, that reflects something that they're going through, whether it's a joy or a sadness or something like this. And I think that's reflective of green because, again, it's this idea of learning to really tune into other people's feelings. But it's a comedy, so it's actually really hilarious also. And a lot of times when people are singing, they'll break out into song and dance. It's not just singing, but there's dancing. Of course, this is all in her head. They're not, like there'll be a few seconds where there's song and dance, and then it'll go back to normality. Zoe is a computer programmer, and she lives in San Francisco, which is right next to Bed in Oakland. This workplace, I think, is really funny. It's a super cool place. And it reflects a lot of what I would think are the green work values, which is sort of supporting your employees in every way possible, being friendly with them, trusting in them to do the right thing by giving them perks that will make them happy. So for example, they have pool tables, they have pinball machines, they have isolation pods. So if they're getting stressed or frustrated, they can go isolate themselves. They have a snack bar, they have a meditation room, etc. Another interesting storyline is her romance with effectively two men at the same time. She has trouble deciding between these two men that she loves. And I think it kind of is reflective of this concept of polyamory that we hear a lot about lately. I think there's always been this concept of polyamory has always existed, but I think in the past it was more reserved for men. Like a man would have a mistress, but you weren't supposed to talk about it. It was sort of acknowledged, but kept, quiet. And now there's this idea that it's also possible for a woman to love more than one man, and it doesn't need to be something shameful. And in this series, the two men actually sort of figure out that she has feelings for them both. And because they themselves are, somewhat evolved, they don't get into a fist fight like you would have imagined at Red, but rather they become friends and just kind of wait for things to play out the way that they're supposed to. And then there's a character called Mo, who is the neighbor, Zoe's neighbor, and she is gender fluid. Actually, I call her she, but she's actually a he, and this whole thing of pronouns comes up because she's a man. At first, I genuinely thought she was a woman because she wears these fabulous costumes and she has a different wig every time I see her. And in the show, they call her a he, but I always refer to her as a she because I see her as a woman. And she helps Zoe to decipher these songs that she hears people sing to figure out what it is that's going on with them and how she can help them. Also, this restaurant that Mo and another character, Simon, open up together, I think is very indicative of Green. They open up a restaurant in an old warehouse. And in this restaurant, you can order food from any restaurant that you like, and they bring the food there so that you can share it with your friends. In other words, they don't have their own kitchen. They don't make their own food. You just order drinks there. They do serve drinks, but what you share, there's a cool space. You share the presence of your friends, and you can be individuals in the sense of, you know, one person likes sushi, another person likes Italian food, and another person likes Chinese food. Well, you each order from your individual restaurants and you all share it together in this cool space where you get your drinks, which again, for me is reflective of this idea of Green. Everybody is allowed and encouraged to be an individual together. And here we see some clients coming into the restaurant, some customers, and they've got their phones. They're ready to make their orders. They have the very hipster look. And again, the integration of technology is very important. And next is Bet talking about the Expanse. Are you there, Bet?
Yes, I am. Okay, so I have to be quiet because my husband's sleeping. Okay, so what's fascinating about the Expanse is that it really covers the whole spectrum. And what is actually interesting, I'm hoping that it's actually a turquoise society because they realize they need to be multiplanetary to save humanity, right? We need to get off of one solitary planet. So they basically create rocket ships and move to the moon. And there's these people who mine the belt. So it's this, and also Mars is colonized. So there's multiple planets that are colonized. The humans are mining the belt. But what happens is the society has every level of the spiral. And I'm going to start from the top. So Kristen is a Green character. She's very politically savvy, and she basically has to work with every kind of personality. So she's able to work with everyone, but she's very Green in that, and she might be yellow actually, but she's always bringing people together. She wants to hear people's voices, and where other people are like, let's just kill those people, she's like, let's work with them. So she's one of my most favorite characters and a hero of mine. You can go to the next slide. So we also have Orange. I mean, because it's all about mining the belt and getting more resources and using technology to make more money and science, right? They're trying to explore. So it's a very orange society still, and trying to get money is very important to them. Next slide. So they're very blue also because there's a lot of military, like this I think is the Inners military, which includes Mars and Earth, and they're fighting against the Belters. And there's lots of different things that happen in the 3 or 4 seasons that have happened. So I'm kind of just generalizing. Also, I'm trying not to do spoilers because I want to watch all the things that I haven't seen yet. But it's really very focused on discipline. When you're in space, people can die very easily. So discipline is very important, and there's lots of rules. So it's still a very blue society. And Christian, as one of the leaders, has to deal with that and know how to command and deal with blue. Next slide. All right, so It's also very tribal. You can see everyone's trying to play off each other. They try to make alliances and then break them. So it's a very, very tribal society. And this one is a picture of the Mars troops. And I mean, I just was like, this is so red. And I feel like the Mars people are definitely very red as a culture. They're very much into being macho, because if they walk outside without their suit on, they're going to die. And when they go to Earth to visit, they can't even deal with the gravity, and they're like almost dying. So it's like the life circumstances have made them very tough and very individualistic. Next slide. Okay, but purple does come into play. It's not as much as I would like, but there are some magical pieces, and more in the first episode or first seasons. There are some mystical things going on, and there is power in the universe, and we don't understand exactly, but we need to be aware of it and learn how to tap into it. And the main character basically learns how to talk with this power to learn secrets about the universe. And I really like that aspect of the series. Next slide. But when you're dealing with space, you could die at any moment. Any moment, death can happen. And this, again, no spoilers, but our characters have to fight for life. And I'm talking about air. I think even though, in our origins of our species, probably air wasn't the thing that people are like, I need some air right now. But when you're in space and you get a leak in your spaceship, air is what you want. And also you can freeze. There's times people they fall out the space hole, whatever it's called. And they're like dying out there, and they're like, how do I get back in the spaceship? So life is very fragile. And it's, even though we have all this fancy technology, it's really on the edge. So I love this series. I think everyone should watch it. I hope I didn't give any spoilers. Really great characters. And they operate at all these different levels in order to make it. And I think it's very realistic for how humanity will be whenever we get off this planet. All right, that's it.
All right,
Back
thank you.
you.
So I wanted to talk about a documentary called The Biggest Little Farm. I feel like this is green going into yellow. I don't know if you have seen it, but it's a couple that sort of leave their city life behind to start this farm. And it's a pretty major project because they rehabilitate a farm that where the soil is compacted and pretty much dead. So they have to bring it back to life, and they have this vision to, it's like the opposite of monoculture, to bring back as many types of plants and animals as possible, to bring back as much diversity as possible. So for me, it's a bit yellow because it's like rediscovering how the earth works. It's like rediscovering Beige, the life cycle of life and death, because they also experience animals dying, crops failing, and the farm being on the brink of, not working out many times. But they do it in a way that it's optimistic, and they persevere, and they document it. Obviously, he's a filmmaker, so I think the idea was not only to do this farm for themselves, but to share this initiative with others, so that more people will question current farming methods and will think about doing farming differently, and also start to relate to the earth differently. This is a great documentary. And then this is the last slide in yellow, and this might be a stretch. I'm going to make the case for the Umbrella Academy. Maybe after the presentation is done, if you disagree with me about this, I welcome comments, because so the Umbrella Academy is basically a group of, it's a family, a group of children who become adults, who have superpowers, who were raised to learn to control or to use their superpowers, at first to fight evil, but then to try to stop the apocalypse, which is coming, which the father knew was coming, the adoptive father. And he wanted them to do something about it. But they're all sort of dysfunctional individuals, and it's a journey for them to learn how to use their powers and what they need to do to stop the apocalypse. And the reason why I'm putting this in yellow is because, I think we all have this superpower, which is consciousness and intelligence. And we need to learn how to use that on a second tier level, literally, so we don't cause the apocalypse ourselves through our own misuse of our intelligence. In one of the pictures here, you see Vanya, one of the characters, who at the beginning, this is a mini spoiler, but at the beginning of the series, it seems that she's the only one without a power, but she actually has a very powerful power. But her learning how to tap into that is quite interesting, and how to control that. So I think the process of us going through doing shadow work, learning how to grow up, learning how to be grown-ups in the sense of not just getting along with others and being responsible, but learning how to be responsible to the planet, knowing how to talk to each other, forming global networks as needed, etc. So that's why I'm placing this in yellow. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. And I am stopping this presentation now.